Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings to the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now in the Birds of Passage section to the very first of those poems, Song of the Universal. We're going to treat this four-part poem as in a single lecture because I think the unity deserves that we do it that way. This is really one of the more interesting and controversial poems of Leaves of Grass. Is Whitman in this poem inspired, or is he kind of in the end, kind of losing it? And there's scholars who have said that this is one of his weaker poems. I'm going to argue that if you've been reading all of the deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass, you're going to find that this is a pretty compelling poem. The history behind this poem is fascinating. 1876, think about that, 100 years after we hold these truths to be self-evident, the Declaration of Independence. It is a speech. We've seen this already a couple of times in Leaves of Grass, but it was intended as some kind of public delivery speech. Now, our assumption is that you've been with us at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, from inscriptions all the way to the introductory set of comments that we've given on Birds of Passage. We'll turn to our Nortons quickly to get our background information for Song of the Universal. It was, as we said, written in response to the invitation of March 20, 1874 of a group of young men at Tufts College to deliver a poem at commencement. This piece was recited June the 17th in absentia because Whitman's illness prevented his personal appearance. We've talked about this in prior lectures in Whitman's biography and the fact that at times he struggled with poor health. The poem received nearly simultaneous publication in several newspapers, the New York Daily Graphic, an Evening Post on June 17th, the Springfield Republican on June the 18th, the New York World on June the 19th, and the Camden New Republic on June the 20th. Its first book appearance was among the centennial songs of the 1876 Two Rivulets companion volume to Leaves of Grass. Composed in the wake of personal trials, and this is significant. Notably, Walt Whitman's paralytic stroke that he encountered January the 23rd, 1873, and the death of his mother the following May 23rd. It's a strong reaffirmation, Nortons will say. It's a strong reaffirmation of faith, its ideal of perfection's culmination being strongly affected by the poet's reading of Hegel, the German philosopher. And to that degree, we're going to be paying attention to the significance of the Hegelian dialectic, and we'll have more to say about that as well. Now, I want you to consider right away the title. Song of the Universal, and of course, what's another word for universal? It is Catholic. And guys, I'm telling you that if we could bring Whitman right here, right now, and we could have a legitimate Talks with Walt, I can't help but believe that he would start smiling when we would point out, wait a minute, universal, another word for that is Catholic. You're playing around with all kinds of interesting ideas here, aren't you? And he would probably smile and say, I don't know what you're talking about. Now, note the very first word of this poem. The word come, as we have said, is the first word of the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. And so we're going to continue to kind of play around with this. We're going to treat all four sections together. Let's go ahead now and go to work with it. By the way, think about Birds of Passage, as we've already said. Think about the significance of Shelley's To a Skylark and Keats' Nightingale. Both of those are going to be powerful. Think about Passage as it's related to Brooklyn Ferry Part 2, the passing over the river. And so we've got all kinds of interesting things going on. Remember, of course, that universal will be used as a word in Song of the Exposition, passage number 9, as O Universal Muse. So it won't shock us when our opening lines here for part 1 is, Come, said the Muse, sing me a song no poet yet has chanted. Hey, do you remember that the opening lines of Milton's Paradise Lost? We've given full lectures on it at learnstrong.net. To attempt things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. In other words, Whitman is playing in Milton's playfield, right, playground, when he is saying, I'm going to write a poem that no poet has ever yet chanted. Sing me the universal, the Catholic. In this broad earth of ours, and of course this will not shock us that he's using language like that, amid the measureless grossness and the slag. Of course, to say measureless makes us think about Song of Myself, passage 46. I know I have the best of time and space that was never measured and never will be measured. His use of the word measure and measureless is fascinating. Of course, grossness and the slag has to make us think about the American Civil War and the tragedies and the horrific tragedies of that. The word slag is used in the rounded catalog, that's the only other use. Grossness, by the way, is only used one other time in a poem called Thoughts, section number 2. Enclosed, we're going to come back to this idea of being wrapped around, enclosed, hugged, enclosed and safe within its central heart. What is the heart, right? Nestles the seed perfection. And this idea of growing, nestles, by the way, only used in all of Leaves of Grass, a poem, set of poems that's so much about growing and seeds and all that. It's the only time the word nestles ever gets used. I love the kind of, that we stumble onto things like that. The seed perfection. It isn't just about evolution. For Whitman in this poem, America is the great perfection. Okay, now obviously, are we talking in the real or the ideal? That's the Platonic question that he's going to play with here. By every life a share, or more or less, underlined obviously in your own copy, every. None born, but it is born. Concealed or unconcealed, the seed is waiting. And of course, this idea of the seed, we're going to get to husks in section 2. And remember what he says about himself at the end of Song of Myself 52. I wait somewhere for you. This idea of anticipation and waiting. And then we jump right to section 2. And this use of the word lo, we haven't seen it a lot in Leaves of Grass. We're going to see it twice now in section 2. Lo, keen-eyed, towering science. Now we've talked about Whitman's association with science and the power of science in the mind of Whitman, and here now we're going to start playing around with this juxtaposition between science and faith. We're also going to talk about the great German philosopher Hegel and the new science as Whitman was starting to think about it. Lo, keen-eyed, towering science, as from tall peaks, the modern overlooking. We got this word picture, by the way, you'll remember in Song of Myself 46, as we're standing on a knoll. Successive, absolute fiats issuing. Now, that's interesting. He's going to use the word absolute. Later it's going to be permanent. Okay? And this is that discussion of faith versus science. Yet again, lo, the soul above all science, for it has history gathered like husks around the globe, for it the entire star myriads roll through the sky. So notice you've got this interesting debate or dialectic. Can we use that term? Because I think he's very influenced by Hegel. I agree with scholars here. I think Hegel is standing behind, but then I think Hegel stands behind a whole lot of Leaves of Grass. But for sure, here I think it is that notion of the tension of the dialectic between, on the one hand, faith and on the other hand, science. And yet he's going to say the soul is more important than the body in this regards. It is all of history is gathered together. We can think of this as evolution, right? No question. In spiral routes, think about your Hegelian dialectic. We have our thesis. We have its opposite, the antithesis. They're struggling, dialectic, they're struggling together to produce the synthesis. And out of that synthesis grows the new thesis. We've given more lectures on this at learnstrong.net. Evolves the new thesis, which of course will have its antithesis. And this is the way Hegel learned to read history in any number of his books. Remember that Phenomenology of Spirit is published in 1807, right? So I mean, we'll come back to that in a bit. In spiral routes, of course, this spiraling makes us think of Yeats in the gyre, the widening gyre. In spiral routes, by long detours, in other words, it took a long time to get to America. Notice in parenthetics, as a much tacking ship upon the sea. We'll think of O Captain, My Captain, but obviously we're thinking about Odysseus and his tacking upon the sea in the Odyssey. For it, the partial to the permanent flowing, again the evolution. For it, the real to the ideal tends. And this idea that we're trying to figure out what is fundamental or real. For it, the mystic evolution, nor the right only justified, but we call evil also justified. This use of mystic, you'll remember it is an echo from Song of Myself, passage 23. That mystic, baffling wonder, you'll remember, alone completes all. And you'll remember in starting from Paumanok, passage 18. Do you remember, or passage 7? Do you remember this one? Let's just go to it for just a second, just so I can remember this echo with you from starting from Paumanok. We obviously did all of this at passage 7. I'm the credulous man of qualities, races, ages. You'll remember I advance from the people in their own spirit. Here is what sings unrestricted faith. And then omnes, he'll say, let others ignore what they may. I make the poem of evil also. I commemorate that part also. I am myself just as much evil as good, and my nation is, and I say, there is in fact no evil. Which takes us back, of course, to Emerson's Divinity School address, as we commented on it. You'll remember that he said, good is positive, evil is merely privation, not absolute. He'll say it this way: it's like cold, which is a privation of heat. So Whitman is very much in line with that idea when he says what we call evil also justified. Forth, notice the use of the word forth and from. Forth from the masks, no matter what, from the huge festering trunk, from craft and guile and tears. In other words, this is his theodicy. Not why did this happen to us as a nation, the Civil War especially, but why did it happen for us? Health to emerge and joy, joy universal. By the way, notice how he stacks words like joy, joy together in this poem. Out of the bulk, the morbid, and the shallow, out of the bad majorities, the very countless frauds of men and states. Obviously, he's thinking about the Civil War here. Electric, antiseptic yet cleaving, suffusing all, only the good is universal. And for, of course, the Platonists in the house, and we give them full lectures on this at LearnStrong.net, you can't help but smile when he uses this idea of the good as being universal. We immediately think, don't we, of the cave allegory of Republic 7, and you can go find those lectures at LearnStrong.net. Halfway through the poem now at passage 3, over the mountain groves, disease and sorrow. Again, this is his theodicy. An uncaught bird. This is the only reference to birds in all of Birds of Passage section. An uncaught bird is ever hovering, and then again, see, notice how he stacks these words, hovering, hovering, high in the pure, happier air. And immediately we have to think about, again, the two great poems of birds that we love to talk about in 303. Obviously, Shelley's To a Skylark, as well as Keats's Nightingale. From imperfections, murky as cloud. In other words, out of the worst, the grossest imperfections, darts always forth one ray of perfect light. You'll go back to the use of the word perfect with Nestle's The Seed Perfection, right, in the first section. One flash of heaven's glory. In other words, his picture is simple. All this tension, all this dialectic, evolutionarily speaking, culturally speaking, has produced this amazing thing that he'll call, of course, in part 4, America, right? To fashion's customs discord, to the mad Babel den, referencing, and by the way, it's the only time Babel gets used in all Lisa Grass, talking obviously about the Genesis 11 story. The mad Babel den, the deafening orgies. Now we've seen his radical use of this word orgies, native moments, city of orgies, right? Soothing each lull, a strain is heard, just heard, from some far shore, the final chorus sounding. Final, later in part 4, it's going to be culmination sounding. In other words, is this the end of history? For Whitman, in some ways, he almost sees America as the culmination of everything evolutionary speaking. And then the use of the word, oh, we've seen that a few times, obviously in Lisa Grass. Oh, the blessed eyes, the happy hearts, that see, that know, the guiding thread. I mean, think about Ariadne and Theseus in our story, of course, in the labyrinth, as he's about to use the word. That see, that know, the guiding thread so fine along the mighty labyrinth. In other words, all of history is produced this thing for Whitman that we'll call America. And then notice thy and thyself and thou 5 times now. And thou, America, now to finish, part 4. For the scheme's culmination, again, it's all coming to its fruition. Its thought and its reality for these, not for thyself, notice in parenthetics, thou hast arrived. And this will be for Whitman huge. Whitman is going to argue that America is not just about America. America is about the world and the ability to show to the world just what democracy can look like. Obviously, we're speaking in the ideal. Thou, too, surround us all. Embracing, again, he loves this word picture of hugging or embracing. Carrying, welcoming all. You'll remember, of course, the New Colossus of 1883, right? Emma Lazarus's poem, Give Me, You're Tired, You're Poor. We've given a full lecture on the poem elsewhere. Welcoming all, thou too by pathways broad, pathways, only time in all Lisa Grass ever used, and new, to the ideal tendest. Now this idea of tending, and again this is kind of, in my estimation, this is what Whitman always saw himself pointing towards, tending as a poet, right? The measured faiths of other lands, obviously religions, the grandeurs of the past are not for thee, but grandeurs of thine own. In other words, somehow transcending the ancient faiths. Again, universal, i.e. Catholic. Deific faiths in amplitudes absorbing, comprehending all. And then notice the repetition, 7 times now, the word all. all eligible to all, the inclusivity of it all. All, again, how he stacks those words. For immortality, love like the light, silently wrapping all, again, this enclosing and wrapping. Nature's amelioration, you'll remember this from Song of the Rolling Earth, number 1. Amelioration is one of those words. It's the only other time amelioration gets used. Nature's amelioration, blessing all. And again, the blessing, again, the religious language here. Blessing all. The blossoms, fruits of ages, orchards divine and certain, forms, you got to smile that we're talking about the good as being universal in Plato, and then here it is with forms. Forms, objects, growths, humanities, to spiritual images, ripening. And there's the key word. Everything has ripened to fruition now to this America. And then he finishes with almost like a prayer. Give me, O God, very, very unusual in Leaves of Grass. Give me, O God, to sing that thought. In other words, this is the invocation of the muse. Some have seen this as the invocation of the great American epic. Right here it is. Give me, give him or her I love, this quenchless faith in thy ensemble. Whatever else withheld, withhold not from us. Belief in plan of thee enclosed in, notice capitalized, time and space. We've seen that right in time and space. Health, peace, salvation, universal. Thy ensemble, Norton's will remind us, is a transcendental concept rife in Walt Whitman's youth, was the integrated ensemble of all microcosms in the grand single macrocosm of being, and again, so Hegelian in that regards. Again, salvation takes us back to universal, the next word, and obviously our use of the word Catholic. And then he finishes. Is it a dream? You'll remember this in starting from Almanac number 2 for the first time, the use of the word dream. Dream gets used a lot in Leaves of Grass. Nay, but the lack of it, the dream. And failing it, life's lore and wealth, a dream. And all the world, a dream. That is to say, is it real or is it unreal, this thing we call America? It's quite a compelling poem when you think about it from the perspective of Plato and, of course, Hegel. At 2a, our messages here. Well, all the universe has been moving, tension-wise, towards this thing called America, that is to say, the ideal. Or maybe it was just a dream. It's an interesting way to read this poem. I think for Whitman, it is the ultimate dream, we might say. At 2b, I love this word order stuff, how he stacks words like joy, joy, as you've seen it there. At 3, I mentioned Hegel, of course, 1770 to 1831. His dialectic and the phenomenology of spirit of 1807 has such a tremendous influence, obviously following out of Marx. And I think this had a lot to do with the way Whitman thinks in this poem. Finally, this is an interesting question at 3b, I think, do you think Whitman here is inspired or is he just tired? Do you get the sense that he's kind of coming to the end of it? How about this one? Do you think that America is in fact the dream? We call it the American dream as we're studying, for example, Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, right? And has the dream come true, and can it come true? And if so, when, in your regards? And what role have you played at all in the American dream, or has the American dream played for you? Well, let's move on to Pioneers, oh Pioneers, and maybe we'll even get a mention of the great Willa Cather. Yay. Thank you.